In 1999, I was supposed to take a 2-week vacation with some high school friends to see our favorite European soccer clubs. Instead, I ended up backpacking solo for 3 months, sleeping on trains, losing a friend literally, and figuring out how to travel Europe on a shoestring budget of $3,500, well before smartphones, Wi-Fi, and Google Maps. That trip changed my life. It opened up my eyes to the wonder of travel and set me on a path I've been chasing for the past 25 years. Hi, my name's Craig, and my first trip to Europe rearranged my priorities. And ever since, I've been trying to help others travel smarter, cheaper, and more confidently. So if you're dreaming of a Euro trip of your own, I hope my story will help inspire you to make those plans and take the leap to plan your first trip affordably and with confidence. In the 90s, my high school friends and I were obsessed with European soccer and children and grandchildren of European immigrants, so we made a plan to take a pilgrimage for 2 weeks through Europe to some of our favorite soccer teams to visit their clubs and maybe catch a match. Lazio, AC Milan, PSG, Arsenal, Glasgow Rangers, and Juventus. We had no idea how to plan such a trip. We were all in university at the time, so we didn't have a lot of money. One of my friend's mothers suggested using her travel agent to help us plan that trip. That travel agent gave us a rough estimate of about $3,500 for a 2-week typical tourist style vacation for flights, a rental car, American style tourist hotels, and the incidentals for the trip, hitting the cities that we had planned to go to: Rome, Paris, Milan, Turin, London, and Glasgow in Scotland. $3,500 sounded like a lot to all of us. My friends had their parents to foot the bill for their trip. I didn't have that luxury, unfortunately, and being a broke college student, what I decided to do was take a semester off of university, increase the hours of my current part-time job, and find a second full-time job to work 6 days a week to save for 6 months so that I would have the money to travel with my friends for those 2 weeks. So with that budget in mind, the 4 of us went back to plan a epic 2-week trip. We were super excited, I was nervous, and then everything changed. At a library one day, while I was working 6 days a week, I stumbled across a book that changed my entire perspective of what was possible with the budget that we had set and European travel in general. The book was called Europe Through the Back Door by a guy named Rick Steves. I actually still have a copy of that book, and again, this book changed everything. It wasn't your typical guidebook. It was a manifesto to smart, independent, budget-minded travelers. How to travel Europe affordably, with confidence, and not as a typical tourist, as someone who wants to interact with the culture and the locals that you're there to experience. I took that book home. I finished reading the 300 plus pages of it in a single weekend. Reading that book flipped a switch in me. I stopped thinking of that trip as just a vacation and started imagining it as an adventure, my own European adventure. And that actually ended up changing the trajectory of my entire life. And when I was finished, I realized that with Rick Steves' advice, with that same $3,500 budget, I could travel through Europe on my own for 3 months, the entire summer. I was super excited. I ran to tell my friends thinking that they would be just as excited and we would have a summer adventure together. They weren't. They laughed at me, they thought I was crazy, their parents thought I was naive. My parents were less skeptical, and I was a little disheartened that my friends wouldn't want to travel the entire summer with me. But that didn't stop me from deciding then and there to do this on my own. So I bought a backpack, a Euro pass, a money belt, and changed my entire plans. While I was planning this trip for 3 months, I did tell my friends that for the first 2 weeks, I would travel with them. However, I wasn't going to stay in the same hotels as they were. I wasn't going to use the rental car that they were. I wasn't going to spend money on tourist restaurants. I'd be staying in hostels, using the efficient rail system through Europe, and I'd be eating locally, whether that meant markets or grocery stores. I would be spending as little as I can to stretch that budget for as long as I could. I told them I'd meet them in Rome in 1 week, and without smartphones, without email, without any communication whatsoever, we banked on hope to ensure that I would be there at the airport in Rome the day they arrived. A week before they were leaving, I flew out to Madrid. With a $365 round trip, open jaws, open-ended voucher for leaving on any plane with a open seat from any city on the East Coast of the US to any city in Western Europe. So it was a very, very flexible ticket that I had through a now defunct company called Airhitch. It was actually a budget traveler's dream. I didn't even know where I'd be flying into until I stepped on the plane. I arrived in Spain with absolutely no plan, but I quickly learned everything. How to find hostels, how to sleep on trains for free, how to meet other travelers, how to eat affordably, and change plans on the fly. And I learned that there were a lot of people traveling Europe just like me. Backpack in tow, Eurail pass, and a very strict budget staying at hostels. Within that first week, I made it from Madrid to Barcelona along the French Riviera, into Nice, then into Italy through Milan and Cinque Terre before meeting up with my friends in Rome. By the time I met my friends in Rome, I felt like an experienced backpacker. To my friend's surprise, I was actually at the right airport at the right time to meet them as they got off the plane. To my surprise, they got off the planes with backpacks, Eurail passes, and money belts. They had decided somewhere between me leaving and them boarding the plane to scrap all of their plans and follow me, not for the full summer, but for 2 weeks as backpackers. And that was amazing. That changed the tone. That was a great surprise to me when they got off the plane. They still weren't convinced that $3,500 could make it through the entire summer. Luckily, I would prove them wrong. Those first few days in Rome were exciting and intense. We got locked out of a hostel. We played soccer in front of Olympio Stadio at 3 a.m. with a bunch of street urchins, drinking Jack Daniels and playing the bongos. We scored tickets to a all-star Serie A match and got to watch some of our Italian heroes score some screamer goals at one of the stadiums we were hoping just to see. We argued, we got lost, we laughed hard. Then, one friend's backpack got stolen the day we were leaving Rome. He almost went home. I had to reassure him that it would be better to be with nothing but the clothes on your back and the very little money he had left in his money belt in Europe than working at his job back home. Luckily, he believed me, and we continued with a slightly edited trip from there. After Rome, we headed north to Cinque Terre. I had told my friends about my couple days in Cinque Terre, and they were super excited to experience it for themselves. We ate the freshest seafood, we did some amazing hikes along the coast, we had a lot of fun swimming, and we reconnected, and we let some of the tension that had built up in Rome just fall by the wayside. One of my friend's favorite teams was Juventus, and we got to visit Turin after we left Cinque Terre, and he got to not only stumble upon the headquarters of the Juventus team, but also see their stadium at Dell'Alpi. He was so excited just to see the stadium that the loss of his backpack had kind of faded away at that moment. And after losing his backpack and all his money, except for what he had kept in his money belt, he really needed that moment. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that Juventus visit was the emotional glue that kept my friend from quitting the trip. But then we went to Paris. And Paris broke us. We arrived at Paris excited to see the city, excited to see the Louvre, Notre Dame, Eiffel Tower. However, strike shut down the city. There were no beds to be found, and museums and cathedrals were also closed. Another day, all the mass transit and cabs in the city shut down simultaneously. Tensions boiled over, we fought, and one morning, one of my best friends was gone. All he left was a note on the bed saying, "I'm done, I'm flying home, here's the money I owe you." And just like that, we were down to 3. Me and my 2 remaining friends took the train from Paris to London and spent a couple days exploring London and just trying to reground the trip so that any further tensions or frustrations were eliminated. After that, we went to Scotland. My father was born in Scotland. He grew up in Scotland. We still have family in Scotland. His cousin kindly enough put us up for 3 nights at her house, and on the second day we were there, offered to be our personal tour guide and drive us through the Highlands of Scotland and around some of the famous sites, and that was an amazing experience. For the first time, we slowed down a bit on the trip. We visited the Highlands, Stirling Castle, Loch Lomond, Urquhart Castle on Loch Ness, Glencoe, Oban, just shy of the Isle of Skye. So we did a lot in the couple days that we were there. We visited Glasgow, and I was able to stand in front of my favorite soccer club and my father's boyhood soccer club, the Glasgow Rangers, at Ibrox. So standing in front of Ibrox was really, really cool. Just knowing that my father had spent his youth going to matches at this club was amazing to be standing right there. And it wasn't until maybe 25 years later that I was able to attend a match with him at the stadium. And that is a story for another time. So now that 2 weeks were up with my friends, we traveled back to London via the train, and I said goodbye to them. 2 days later, a cousin from home flew over, met me in London, and we kind of redid the same exact trip that I had already just done with my friends. We left London, took the ferry from Dover to Calais, a train into Paris, and from Paris, we went back to Italy. We spent some time in Switzerland, in Interlaken. That was cool. In Italy, we did Pisa, Florence. We were able to blitz Florence in the 8 to 11 hours that we had the one day on our way to Rome. We spent a couple days in Rome. And when we were in Rome, we just off the cuff thought it'd be a great idea to see if we could find our grandmother's hometown. My grandmother is from Italy. She's from a small town in Calabria. At the time, my cousin and I didn't know that Calabria was a region. We thought it was a city or town. So when we were looking at a map, we saw Reggio di Calabria and thought that must be where she was from. It wasn't. We took a long train to Reggio di Calabria, had some misadventures in Reggio di Calabria, which ended up with us being awoken in the middle of the night by the roar of a lion. And then we found out by calling home that our grandmother was from a small town named Amantea, a little north from Reggio. We jumped on the train, head towards Amantea. Without a plan, with no address, we stepped out of the train station and ran into an old man and his son who looked at us like we were out of place. 2 American kids with backpacks in this town that didn't seem to get any tourism at all. And in some broken English, they asked what we were doing in the town. We explained to them in poor Italian and probably some charades that we were looking for our grandmother's home. He drove us to the town hall, translated to the employees of the town hall, who then stopped what they were doing to look up paper records over the past 6 decades to find any trace of our grandmother. While they were doing this, the man brought us to his own home. His wife made us lunch, and then he brought us back to the town hall. They had bad news for us. The home of our grandmother had been torn down decades ago, but they also had good news. My grandmother still had living family in the town. The employees of the town hall had taken it upon themselves to contact this family and let them know that we were in town, and this family wanted to meet us. They welcomed us with open arms, fed us a home-cooked meal to welcome us. They put us up in our own living space for 3 days while they showed us around the town. My cousin and I didn't speak Italian, My grandmother's cousin and her kids didn't speak English. We got by with simple words, broken English, a lot of charades, and really just guessing at what each other was saying. But the generation closest to our age or younger spoke some English. They were able to translate a little bit so we could communicate easier than just smiles and gestures. My cousin's grandmother showed us where they used to hang out. She showed us where our grandmother's home used to be, and the grandchildren who were closer to our age at the time and spoke a little bit of English showed us where they played soccer. They showed us where they hung out. They took us up and down the town hills on their Vespas. My cousin and I made some corny jokes about the mafia, and that stopped our young cousins in their tracks. They looked at us and told us very clearly that's not something you joke about in that area of Italy. It was my first lesson in cultural sensitivity and realizing that what we might take for granted as a joke back home isn't necessarily something to joke about, make fun of, or otherwise even talk about in a place where it's a real concern. So lesson learned. It was a really, really meaningful visit, and it was just an off-the-cuff idea of me and my cousin thinking, let's go find where Grandma lived. It was easily the most meaningful detour of the entire summer. After Armentea, my cousin and I spent several days in Paris. At that time, luckily for me and my cousin, the strikes were over. I was able to see Notre Dame, see the Louvre, and we had a really good time in Paris. We took the ferry back across the channel to Dover. We went back up to Scotland because he wanted to see Scotland as well. And this time we stayed with a different cousin of my father's. This cousin allowed me to borrow a car from him. I drove on the left for the first time, which was, after the first hour, very easy. But that first hour was a little bit getting used to, and I actually sideswiped a parked vehicle. I didn't see any damage, so I drove off. I don't recommend that, but it happened, and it was a lesson learned. And to this day, I tell anybody thinking of driving on the left-hand side, whether in the UK or Ireland, to do it. If you're a competent driver in the US or wherever you're from, you'll be a fine driver on the left. It just takes about 30 to 60 minutes and one near miss to get used to it and feel like you've been doing it your entire life. And even though I wouldn't recommend redoing the same route twice in the same trip, luckily for me, the experiences I had with my cousin were slightly different and more impactful in some ways. I was an expert in these areas, these places that we visited, that I was able to take him back to and show him around almost like his own tour guide. And I think that worked out well. After my cousin flew home from London, I was on my own again. I think 24 hours, it was very lonely, but I had made a plan with one of my cousins in Scotland to meet him back in Scotland, and he was going to take me to a small island with his in-laws off the northwest coast of the mainland. So I had a week between my cousin flying home and having to get back to Scotland, and I decided to go to Ireland. As I traveled solo through Ireland, I realized I wouldn't have as much time as I wanted to see everything on the island that I wanted to see. So I had to make some prioritized decisions, and I blitzed Dublin, Cork, and Belfast, and along the way I kissed the Blarney Stone. I watched locals jump up and perform an impromptu river dance while I was sitting next to them drinking a pint of Guinness that was the best tasting, freshest Guinness straight from the source. Then I took a ferry back to Scotland out of Belfast to meet my cousin so that he could take me to the Isle of Lewis. His father-in-law was a real-life shepherd with a flock of sheep living on a croft on this isolated, Gaelic-speaking island off the northwest coast of Scotland. It was truly amazing. Remote, windswept, and beautiful in a very rugged way. While I was staying with his Gaelic-speaking in-laws, I borrowed a bike they had and cycled across the island to lighthouses. I watched sword fighting at a castle, and to this day, I still fondly remember peat smoke from the fire his father-in-law would light every night after he came back from herding or shearing the sheep while he drank his glass of whiskey. It was quiet, raw, and healing. After the trip I'd had with my friends, even my cousin, it was time to just relax and slow down myself, and it was just what I needed when I needed it. I was sick. My body felt like it had run a marathon every day that entire trip. I traveled fast, I ate sparingly, and I slept even less. My body was telling me it was time to go home. I ended my journey back on the mainland of Scotland, visiting some more family of my father's before I actually did go home. I was told stories about my father's childhood I'd never even heard. I visited my grandmother's grave, who I'd never even met. I felt like I was closing a loop that I didn't even know was opened. And at that moment, I felt something shift. This wasn't about travel anymore. It wasn't about ticking sites off a list. It was about connection, perspective, and identity, my own identity, and reconnecting with my father through his family that still lived in Scotland. When I called AirHitch one last time in hopes to find a nearby flight, I lucked out and found a flight out of Glasgow into Toronto. Kind of serendipitous that I was leaving from Glasgow, being in Scotland, and flying to Toronto, which was only an hour and a half from my home. So looking back on that first trip, I realized I didn't see everything I wanted to. There were so many other places I wish I had gone. I got sick, I lost a friend. Part of me feels like I wasted a lot of my time inefficiently doubling back on parts of the trip, whether it was with my cousin, whether it was myself, spending a lot of time in Scotland with my father's family. And I made a lot of mistakes on that first trip, a lot of mistakes. But I learned from those mistakes. I learned to trust myself. I gained a lot of confidence. I learned to be flexible when things weren't going our way. And I learned to find joy in a lot of uncertainty on that trip. The best parts of that trip, they weren't in a guidebook. They were in the detours that I took or the decisions that might have went wrong at the time. They were the strangers that I met or the family that I didn't even know I had. They were in the wrong turns that led to something completely unexpected but amazing. I realized those moments actually made the trip that much more memorable than had I just knocked off sites on a checklist. When I planned that trip originally with my friends, I went searching for soccer clubs and stadiums, and I found family, identity, and resilience instead. That's the magic of travel. If you're planning your first Euro trip, you won't see it all, and that's okay. Found that out on my first trip, and I've been keeping that in mind for 25 years. But sleep more than I did, pack less than you think you're gonna need, be kind, curious, and open to new experiences, and whatever comes your way. Say yes, even when the path is unclear, because one day you're gonna look back on that trip and you're gonna realize that that trip just didn't show you the world. It actually helped you realize your place in it. This was just an overview of my first trip. If you enjoyed this video and you want to dive a little bit deeper into my summer adventures on that first trip and hear some of the funny and unbelievable stories from that trip, click this video here for the first segment of that playlist. And if you want to plan your own Euro trip, check out the community and web app I'm building called Eurotripper, where I'm helping people plan their trips to Europe affordably and with confidence. And hopefully one day I'll see you in Europe. Bye. It was a while I was planning I'll see you in Europe. Bye.